Yo, what's going on, guys? It's been a minute. I decided to take the summer off for some personal reasons. I wanted to give myself some time to rejuvenate, take care of my mental health, my physical health, and yeah, it's been a long summer, but I'm happy to be back here making videos for you guys again. And it's just in time, too, because there is a busy fall release schedule coming up. And that fall release schedule started with Star Wars Outlaws, but we're not talking about that today. No, that was my intention for the first video back. However, I played a few hours of Star Wars Outlaws, and I just was not feeling it. That game is no good. However, a game that is very good is Astro Bot. So if you're unaware, Astro Bot's Playroom was a game developed by Team Asobi and was a pack-in title with the PS5. It was meant to show off the new controller, the DualSense, and all the new features, the rumbles, the haptics, the audio, all that stuff, and I think it did a pretty good job at that. I mean, Astro Bot's Playroom was a very fun title. I mean, you hear people to this day talking about how good of a launch title it was and how good of a pack-in title it was. It really showed off what the PS5 was capable of and the evolution into next gen that it could do. And it didn't focus on fancy graphics or awesome ray trace lighting, which the PS5 can do, but it focused on the way the PS5 actually changes experiences in meaningful ways, which is with the controller, the audio, and all of the things Sony has been working on. Gaming tech is starting to hit a diminishing returns point when it comes to photorealism and graphics, and so I think it was really smart for Sony to focus on more tangible differences this generation. And so, ever since the release of Astro Bot's Playroom and the PS5, people have been talking about where's Astro Bot? Why isn't there more Astro Bot? Especially with the PSVR 2, because Astro Bot was initially released, like the original Astro Bot way back in the day was on the PSVR. And so when the PSVR 2 got announced, it only made sense that Team Asobi was developing a new VR title for Astro Bot. However, it was revealed earlier this year that that wasn't the case. No, instead, Team Asobi for the last 4 years has been working hard on a new 3D platformer for a Sony console. Now, the last time Sony made a 3D platformer, it didn't go very well for them. And then they decided to double down on it. And it went pretty well, but it didn't sell very well. So, unfortunately, it seemed like Sony had given up on challenging Nintendo. You know, the 3D platformer is sort of Nintendo's bread and butter. I mean, think of another studio in the modern day making 3D platformers that sell anywhere near what Nintendo 3D platformers sell. So as of as recently as I can find, Mario Odyssey sold 28 million copies. There really just is not another studio that can do that. I can make a 3D platformer and sell numbers like that. It's just not a thing that happens. And that's not going to change with Astro Bot. To pretend like Sony can sell 20 million copies of this game would be futile. However, I would be surprised if they needed 20 million sales to break even. And so that puts us in an interesting position. My point with all of that is really just to highlight how big of a deal it is that Sony is putting a $60 3D platformer out there and making it one of their tentpole releases for the fall season. That showcases a lot of faith in both Team Asobi and the Astro Bot brand, faith that I'm not sure is justified. So, let's talk about it. In short, Astro Bot on the PS5 is probably the best 3D platformer I've played this generation, and yes, that's including Mario Odyssey. Now, I'm not done with it yet, I'm only a few hours in, so let's take this all with a grain of salt, right? This is more of an impressions video than it is a review. However, the sheer depth of ideas that are present in Astro Bot is insane. Last year when I reviewed Mario Wonder, I talked about how the coolest thing about Mario Wonder is how every single level has a new gimmick, a new idea, and then that same gimmick or idea is wrapped up in a tight little bow, thrown away by the end of the level, and then the next level is a completely new gimmick. And Astro Bot has much of the same feeling going on. Every single level is built around a new core mechanic, usually one that's controlled with the right trigger. This can be something like boxing gloves, or a monkey, or you can climb walls, or there's just a different gameplay spin in every single level. On top of that, these levels are just masterfully designed, with challenging enough, but not too challenging for younger audiences platforming puzzles and sections. The entire game feels like it's broken down into 15-minute chunks, and those 15-minute chunks are then broken down into smaller 5-minute chunks. Now let me explain what I mean. Each level is about 15 minutes. The first 5 minutes of that 15 minutes is the game introducing a new mechanic to you. Basically getting introduced to whatever that level's gimmick is going to be. And then, as it goes on, the next 5 minutes is sort of ingratiating you into that mechanic. So it showed you the surface level stuff, and now it's like, okay, well now couple that with the stuff that's in Astro's regular kit, right? And then the last 5 minutes of each level is where it sort of all coalesces and it reinvents the gimmick. Sort of like a 3-act structure almost. And that leads the game to feeling very palatable. You see, a lot of times when platformers or just games in general try to do something like, okay, buddy, hi. This was another new thing over the summer. This is my little kitty. His name's Jinx. Say hi. Hey, hi, buddy. As I was saying, a lot of games really struggle with sort of making their systems all feel palatable and their ideas all feel palatable. Actually, funny enough, that's an issue I was having with Star Wars Outlaws. I thought Star Wars Outlaws had a lot of really cool ideas and interesting ideas with its levels, but I thought those ideas were not delivered in a very palatable way. Part of that's due to the unforgiving stealth missions and the mid-level combat, but that's a different video for a different day. But my point is, it's really hard to introduce new things to a player, have them wrap their head around it, and then force them to use their brain to take advantage of those new things you've introduced to them. And Astro Bot does that incredibly well. In fact, Astro Bot does that so well that if you had told me that this game was made by Nintendo, the kings of that gameplay loop sort of thing, I would believe you. Every single level in this game feels of that quality. You know what I mean? That Nintendo seal of approval. I mean, it literally exists for a reason, and Astro Bot meets it. It feels like every single level is play tested to no end to make sure that everything is palatable, understandable, and most importantly, fun. On top of that, I think Astro Bot does an excellent job at expanding upon and building upon the ideas and gameplay mechanics that were so beloved in Astro Bot's Playroom. You see, as a pack-in game, Astro Bot's Playroom could only really be a couple hours long to justify what it was as an experience. And so that left a lot of really cool gameplay mechanics on the table. Some of it doesn't work so well, like the motion controls and stuff like that, but there's a lot of stuff in Astro Bot's Playroom that was really cool, and it's still, to this day, one of the only games that actually takes advantage of the DualSense in a way that matters and is fun. And I'm happy to report that Astro Bot really picks up that torch that was passed to it by Astro Bot's Playroom. Every single level incorporates the DualSense into its design in some way. Sometimes it's, the normal DualSense implementation you see that's not all that good, of just like the trigger just feels a little heavier and stuff like that. But other times it really actually has a difference in the game. Sometimes you'll feel little droplets of water in the DualSense controller, like in the little vibrations. I mean, it's little stuff like that, right? But it really does enhance immersion in gameplay. There's a reason that Sony is doing this too. I mean, Nintendo made such a big deal when they announced the Switch out of HD Rumble, and Sony with the DualSense really focusing on rumbles, right? It's because you can only expand on graphics so far, but at some point, you have to actually change the way we're interacting with these games. And I think Sony and Nintendo both smartly recognize this and are being innovators and pushing the medium forward in that way, whereas Microsoft is a little bit behind. And I'm going to be honest, nobody understands immersion through gameplay and controller rumble and stuff like that better than Team Asobi. However, just because graphics aren't their focus doesn't mean that they're not great. And trust me, Astro Bot is one of the best looking PS5 games there is. Now, does it look photorealistic? No, but that's not the intention, right? And if you're somebody who really cares about that stuff, then you already knew this game wasn't for you, and I will see you in the next one. It was great to have you here. It really started to get to that point with Ratchet & Clank on the PS4, and then Ratchet & Clank on the PS5, I forget the subtitle, but whatever it was, also looked at that quality and way better than Ratchet PS4. And now with Astro Bot, it's really pushing that envelope to now, like, it's actually just looking like a Pixar movie. It's crazy. And that's, in part thanks to the power of the PS5, but also in part thanks to Team Asobi's wonderful, delightful visual stylings. I mean, it's just everything from the lighting to the textures to the animations just looks so smooth and so perfect. And there's no rigidity at all that it's honestly just stunning. And it's not only the graphics either. The audio is also just wonderfully immersive. I mean, it's crazy. Another thing Sony has been focusing on is those 3D planar magnetic drivers. But I do have the Pulse Elite earbuds, the little Sony PlayStation branded earbuds that have those 3D planar magnetic drivers, right? And Astro Bot really does take advantage of that stuff. It's got super immersive audio, and it really all just coalesces into an experience that is just delightful to look at, listen to, play, and just all around enjoy. All right, after glazing it for a few minutes, I want to do a little compliment sandwich here and talk just for a second about the tiny little gripes I have. Motion controls are something Nintendo has been fixated on since 2006, right? And it worked out really well for them, so I understand why. However, Sony has gotten so destroyed in the motion control business that I really do not understand why they're still trying to do this. I mean, look back to PlayStation Move and then the PlayStation 4 camera. I mean, genuinely, they've just had their ass handed to them repeatedly with motion controls. Microsoft and Nintendo ate their lunch, and it's okay. Nobody likes them. They are not good. Sometimes Nintendo has a cool implementation. whatever. No one gives a shit about motion controls. So I do not understand why Team Asobi and PlayStation seem so hell-bent on putting them into this game. However, at least you can turn them off in the accessibility menu, so that's something. My other gripe with it is so small that I almost don't want to call it out. However, I do think it's important that I bring it up because I am glazing this game so hard, is the puzzles. Now, this game doesn't have difficult puzzles, right? It's very easy, it's very straightforward. However, sometimes just finding these puzzles or finding your ways to the little bots you're trying to rescue is a struggle. Throughout these levels, some of these Astro Bots are better designed than others. And what I mean by that is some of them are really engaging and fun to collect. You know, they're just these little micro puzzles, just platforming puzzles, or just tiny little environmental puzzles that you solve, and then you rescue a bot, and then you go about your way and finish the level, right? However, some of them are just really annoyingly placed and just really annoying to find. Like, I would be scouring these levels for like a good 10 minutes, and I'm just like, where is this last bot? And I'll find it somewhere that is just totally innocuous and you would never expect it to be. Just some of the very minor design elements and design cues just don't come across to the player as well as I think Team Asobi hoped they would. And again, this is such a minor issue because it's so rare, but it is one of the things that keeps it from that Nintendo seal of approval level. You know what I mean? And it's so small, but when you're playing a Mario 3D platformer and there's those collectibles throughout the level, they always feel perfectly placed. And this game is just not quite there. It's like right on the cusp, but just not quite. All right, now I can finally get to that compliment sandwich I was talking about and talk about the last thing that I wanted to really highlight about this game, which is the set pieces. Now, to be fair, I've only gotten to one of the major set pieces. It's the one at the end of the first world in the game, but it is excellent. This game is structured very much like a Mario game. There's different worlds. In this game, it's galaxies. And these galaxies have a few different levels, and then you beat all those levels, collect a certain amount of the bots, and then you get to a set piece level that's like a boss fight at the end, right? However, I think these set pieces put the ones in Mario Odyssey to shame. Back in 2017, when I played Mario Odyssey for the first time, I adored it. It was a perfect 10 in my eyes, and nothing could change that. And to this day, I still feel pretty much the same. However, after revisiting it a few times, I do have one major gripe with that game, and it's the boss fights. I think that the set pieces and the boss fights are pretty underwhelming. Now, you know, there's exceptions to it. I think the New Donk City set piece is obviously, you know, it's one of those things where you're just like, whoa. And there's moments in the game that are like that, but I think overall the set pieces are pretty lacking compared to other Mario titles. Astro Bot takes that and runs with it. So the end of the first world, this is a very minor spoiler, but I am going to discuss it and show a little footage. So if you are sold on the game already and want to go in completely blind, then maybe duck out here. But the end of the first world is this giant like city chase with this King Kong-esque ape. This ape is going through environments, destroying buildings, and your Astro Bot just trying to keep up. It is so cool. You feel it in the rumbles in your controller. You hear it behind you, in front of you, everywhere. The audio design, the visuals, the vibrations, everything is just so perfectly designed. I mean, just look at some of this footage as I'm talking. It's just so engaging from a visual, auditorial, and gameplay perspective. The platforming is challenging, but not too challenging. You know, it's challenging enough to where I feel engaged, but not too challenging that a kid couldn't beat it, right? It's just finding that perfect Goldilocks sweet spot every time. And the music is going, and it's just, it all coalesces into this just beautiful visual, auditorial masterpiece. And I mean that. Like, it is a very special set piece. And I mean that. It is a very special set piece. And I think this game is a very special game. It is genuinely the very first game I've played that's not made by Nintendo that feels like it was. Like, it feels... It's the intangible thing, right? When people are talking about Zelda or Mario, they talk about the intangible things of just, it just has that Nintendo feel. And this game meets that. And this really, to me, puts all of that conversation to rest. Like, whenever a Nintendo game comes out, like, this was a big part of discourse when Tears of the Kingdom came out. A lot of people say that if this game was made by any other publisher, it would get 8s. It would get 7s or 8s out of 10. And I think Astro Bot really puts that whole argument and discourse to rest. Look at the Metacritic. Everyone agrees that this game is masterful, and it wasn't made by Nintendo. It's just a great 3D platformer. And it turns out when you make a game, regardless of what publisher or developer you are, when you make a game that meets that level of quality and is in the perfect Goldilocks comfort zone the entire time, not too hard, not too easy, looks beautiful, sounds beautiful, and you're never struggling, and it's just so frictionless. Doesn't matter what studio you are, you will get your flowers. And I'm here to give Team Hisobi and Astro Bot its flowers. So yeah, that's Astro Bot. I love it. I can't wait to play more of it, and I highly recommend it to you guys. I think that if you're looking for something that really pushes the PS5 and shows you why you bought the machine, I think Astro Bot is it. I mean, it depends on the type of gamer you are, right? If you're a COD and FIFA gamer, I don't recommend it to you. But if you're someone who's really interested in the mediums of video games as an art form, I think that there is actually no excuse to not play this game. Anyway, thank you guys for being so patient with me. Thank you for watching this video, and I promise I'll be back soon. All right, I will see you later. Peace.